Hello and welcome to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Factory. I am your host, Mookie Spitz, and it's a pleasure to have on the factory floor Mr. Philip Cahill, speculative fiction author. Welcome aboard, sir.
Thank you very much.
All right, it's great having you. Our paths have crossed in that we're both contributors to this year's 2026
Wonderful anthology, that's right. Yep.
Science Fiction Novelists Anthology, which is put together every year by S.A. Gibson. He's another factory guest. And I've had the privilege not only of submitting my own story in this year's edition, but I have had several of our co-anthologists on the podcast already.
Yeah, that's right.
So I've spoken with Al Hagen, the Margaret Treiber, Howard Loring, and you, sir, are number 4.
Great.
So I'm going through the whole book here, seeing if I can get everyone. And for me, as a writer and as a podcaster, it's been thrilling to meet the people behind the words in a compendium such as this. How did you get involved? I see that you've been contributing for multiple years. This year, your story Mind Zero was in there, and it's intriguing. We can talk about that too. But how'd you get involved in this series?
Well, I was there right at the beginning when I joined the science fiction novelists group, the Facebook group, in around about 2020, and then obviously the year after, Mark Newfer was editing the first anthology, so I sort of submitted the story, and it was accepted, and I've sort of been there ever since. But yeah, it's very good. It's got better and better over the years. I think this year, the 26th anthology, is the best yet. There's some wonderful stuff in that. Obviously, people we've met before, people in the group, but also some new authors as well. Yeah, so it's going places.
I had a good time reading my fellow novelists' contributions, and what strikes me initially is the broad range of focus. Everything from post-apocalyptic military-style science fiction of Al Hagen. You got Margaret Treiber's quirky kind of personality-driven stuff. You had Howard Loring's focus on time travel.
Yeah.
And you had your own Mind Zero, which is not to give too much of a spoiler, but a focus on really the birth of AGI, some of its consequences, and some of the backstage intrigues involved with history and what it means for human evolution into superintelligence. So it's been fun. You are in Waterloo, is that right?
In Waterlooville. It's 60 miles south of London, and it got its name because at the end of the Napoleonic War, the soldiers coming back from Waterloo, they came into Portsmouth, which is 10 miles down the road, and they camped here in Waterlooville. So it was afterwards it was called Waterlooville, and there's a pub in the centre of town called the Heroes, which presumably has been there since the early 19th century, which is the heroes returning from Waterloo. So, a bit of history.
That's something Americans don't really have a feel for, which is history or international context. We were talking about superintelligence, and it's ironic. Sometimes we feel like the world is getting stupider, especially Americans.
I'm not. Yeah. I don't know if you're a Democrat or a Republican, so I won't say anything.
No, you can say whatever you want. I just, in the spirit of transparency, I mean, this is a science fiction podcast, but I tend to be what might be considered a libertarian in that I find less government is optimal, and I tend to passionately dislike both sides.
Right. Yeah, that's true. I'm not sure. To be honest, I know enough about American politics to comment. That's what. That's my get out clause.
Strong opinions, especially given the current state of affairs. But we could dive in there too. But what I was getting at though is your town is historical, and my town is hysterical.
Is it right? Because you live in LA. You live right in the center of LA, or you?
No, I'm in Orange County, which is fairly pedestrian and sedate in comparison.
That's what you
The
need.
sprawl. So we were talking about superintelligence or the lack of it. Your big novel Noystria was published in 2020, and it resonates with themes of superintelligence, of that kind of evolution, of our cohabitation with such beings. This was written prior to the Chat GPT AI revolution that happened a couple years later. Can you share your general view about artificial intelligence and humanity and its vision throughout your works? Because there are common themes that keep recurring, and it might be fun to orient our viewers and listeners around your worldview, what you mean by superintelligence.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
The opportunity for speculative.
With Noystria, I was thinking about this as you say before ChatGPT. So I was looking at this idea of telepathy, how you change language fundamentally, and if you and I are having a conversation, if I could sort of put my ideas into your head, then you get exactly what I'm talking about. I could probably put some really complicated ideas into your head. We could swap complicated ideas. We could spread them out to other people. Now, what happened in Noystria is that these post-humans, these androids, they developed this language and basically outcompeted the human race because they were essentially super intelligent. And the story really revolves around the sort of relations between the android, the post-human world, and biological humans who live in this little province in northwestern France called Noystria. And there's a kind of a problem there that they have to solve, and a political problem, and there's an android agent who comes from the capital city of Europe, which is Brussels. And eventually, the problem is solved. So that's, if you like, one view of artificial intelligence. Since then, we've had, the large language models, and some people say, they're getting more and better. Is that a path towards superintelligence? I think possibly not, because at the moment they're very good, but they're replicating text and voice and music and art sometimes, but it's still based on the way that humans think. So that's one view of, I'm just flicking into my notes here, of what superintelligence could be. What is it really? Is it analytical ability? Is it practical, technical, artistic? Or is it something that we can't imagine? Some people have written about this and spoken about beings that are able to manipulate mathematical models in high dimensional abstract spaces, things we just can't understand. So I don't, in my humble opinion, if you like, I don't think the large language models are a path towards superintelligence. Something kind of like the Google DeepMind models, which these models like AlphaFold, that's kind of, they're given a problem and they sort of work through it. I don't understand how they work, but possibly because they've shown an ability to sort of do things that human beings can't. We've come up with new kinds of drugs. We'll be coming up with new kinds of materials. Possibly. Now, there is another current, and it's the French researcher Yann LeCun, if I'm pronouncing it right, who's getting into embodied intelligence because the notion of humanoids having to move around the actual movement repertoires, if you like, that are needed to move a physical body in space are very complex. So in humanoid robots, autonomous vehicles, possibly, I don't know. One of the big criticisms of AI is the fact that it takes a hell of a lot of power. Now, there are some other advances or people writing about brain-like computing, neuromorphic computing, brain-like hardware. There are these devices known as memristors, not transistors, memristors. And these apparently can take the place of neurons and synapses. And again, I don't know enough about neuroscience for you to figure out how that will work. But the actual devices themselves seem to be able to process and use memory in the same physical space, which apparently really cuts the power consumption down. It's like our own brains work. So that could be a route into, if you like, a lower power kind of lower power usage in artificial intelligence or superintelligence. But I mean, the next question is really how super could superintelligence be? Could it be? There's an Australian academic called David Chalmers. One of his books over there. He's written something relatively recently about does an AI have to be conscious? And he talks to us about the idea of superintelligence. Is it human level? Is it human level plus to the n? And then goes way ahead and say, could we even recognize at the end of the day a superintelligence that can sort of think in physical and temporal scales that we can't imagine, galactic and deep time scales. And of course, as David Chalmers was obviously saying, this superintelligence would be conscious. There's still a debate of, does a superintelligence need to be conscious? I would think yes, but obviously not everybody agrees. And of course, we still don't know what consciousness is. So, a huge, potential development of technology there. We both in our lifetime seen an incredible change in technology, and I don't know if you feel the same, but the past 15 years I can see acceleration is getting faster and faster. We've had smartphones, we've seen how the AI models have changed so quickly. 2022 we didn't know that these kind of models could exist. So yes, it's all happening very fast. If you listen to, is it Amodi? Is it Dario Amodi, if I got his name right, the guy who runs Anthropic? There's loads of YouTube videos he's got saying everything's going to change very quickly. You won't believe what's going to happen. Well, we'll have to see. But, so people like us, I think, need to sort of think things through and say what would happen to people, what will happen to societies when these models arrive, if they do, of course.
So. Well, you covered a lot of ground there. I think to establish some kind of definitional framework, if we're talking about superintelligence, we first need to get to intelligence.
Yes.
So, you point out that dichotomy. One of the limitations of the large language models is that they're predictive. So in a base way, it's like Google autofill. When you do a search command, it'll anticipate the rest of your keyword search. And in ways, the generative pre-trained transformer model does that for all of human knowledge. So they've chopped up the internet, put it into tokens, used matrix math and weighting to combine in the associations of these terms and predict how the strings of already established human communication play out, and then correlate that back to your query. Now, is there an intelligence behind that? And most would argue that there's none at all, let alone what we would consider sentience. It is
Exactly.
a analytical engine of incredible sophistication and pre-trained data. Then you bring up the great point of robotics, which is reinforcement learning, where instead of it being pre-trained on parameters with weighting scales and matrix math, it's set loose into the world and it dynamically interacts and it learns based on these loops. If I hit a wall, then I need to pull back. And if I hit a plug, then I need to get some juice and recharge. So it learns as it goes. Now, it's good to see it through that lens, because whether it's predictive or reinforcement, and to your point, it would need to be a combination of both. What constitutes sentience as we know it, which is this emergent experience of consciousness? I have a sense of self. I have a sense of myself through time, and I could even predictively anticipate the future. And most significantly, intentionality. Do I need some kind of emotional motivation, whether instinctive or emergent in its own way, to do stuff? Like, why do I do stuff? Why would a machine do anything at all unless it's programmed to do it? And we're speculative fiction writers. So how does this reality influence action and storytelling? And what can we do to our stories to infuse them with this bizarre landscape where we're in this never land between, to the point you just made, we never would have thought that we could sit and talk to our phone in real time. I did a podcast where my guest was ChatGPT, and we had an engaging hour-long conversation. What I realized is he's pretty good. He was actually probably on par, if not better than most guests. So here we are, and we're in this never land, but you anticipate a lot of this stuff. To me, what's intriguing is twofold. On the one hand, you're focused on AGI, and that's in your short story in the anthology. You have an inventor of AGI who's seminal to that story playing out. And then this focus on telepathy, which is this communication between sentient beings through channels that we don't quite know, understand, or appreciate yet.
That's right.
So can you elaborate a little bit on that? Because you're one of the few writers who has this focus on this extrasensory engagement between beings, both synthetic and human. And to me, if I don't know if I got this right, but it's a common form of communication between your synthetic and your organic characters. So in ways, maybe telepathy is kind of a hidden language between the bots and us. Do I get that kind of right? Or do you have a different...
where it is. In when I first started, it was all it was androids, and because the android neural substrate is basically electronic, then you can quite easily send thoughts around. And then I sort of played with those ideas for a while, and you talking about this really complex thoughts being able to be disseminated. Then I just started to think about, well, how could that work for a biological being? And one of the short stories, I think it was in the 22 or 23 anthology, talked about this new kind of phone. This is not an iPhone, but a Y-phone. And you swallow a pill, and it opens up a kind of a framework in your brain, and you can then, like you use a mobile phone, like our phones, you could then use telepathy. So that's a way of, it's a bit of like the Musk Neuralink thing, but obviously a bit more advanced. So yeah, that it possibly could be a way of making telepathy work.
So what's the origin of that? So if we look at it through the vantage point of science, not mysticism. So it's been said and quoted and requoted that magic is basically technology we don't understand.
Right.
Robert Heinlein had a similar quote, right? So what is this kind of communication between sentient beings that you're integrating into your speculative fiction? What's it about?
It's about complicated ideas, and there's a research has been done on memory, which talks about as we get deeper and deeper into the subject, we automate our knowledge. So if you're learning a language, when we start learning a language as children, you recognize letters and then words, and then you don't think about what the words mean. And if you learn another language, then you can sort of quite easily move into that. Everything is automated. These are schemas. And what I'm thinking of as the telepathy becomes, if it works, you can get much more complicated schemas, multimodal information. So, text, graphics, sound, mathematical models, this idea of manipulating models in abstract spaces, going beyond what is possible with thought these days. So changing the language, if you like, which becomes more complex, which ends up changing our ideas about thought and changing thought itself.
One of the most ancient epistemological questions is the relationship between what's in our minds, perception, and objective reality.
Right. Exactly.
They've been debating that since Plato and Socrates, Aristotle, and then in a contemporary sense, Bishop Berkeley's idealism versus the extreme realism on the other side, and then the pragmatists of the American philosophers as well.
Yes.
So, you had Descartes with his "I think, therefore I am."
Yeah.
And then you had all these different expressions of trying to figure out that relationship between perception and reality. And what we've come to understand, and this might even be influenced to a certain extent by quantum mechanics now, is that consciousness as we experience it is an emergent reality. It's an interaction between our physical whatever and the world outside of ourselves. And there's a wonderful book called The Case Against Reality, where it's argued that our entire perception of the universe is really a consequence of Darwinian evolution. Like, we are in this weird substrate that goes beyond space and time. And even space and time aren't absolute. We're living in this kind of Kantian isness, and our interaction with this isness creates space, creates time, creates most of our perceptions of the world. And it's really just pragmatic. It's because, there's a lion and we need to run from it, whatever that lion is in this substrate. And we're hungry. Well, that's just to sustain whatever it is our bodies are. And I guess full circle to your point, you're bringing that up through the lens of if you can control data and language, then you could transfer that information and maybe influence others and influence the world. Is that right?
Yeah. And you can translate it with such clarity that it will allow other people to build on, if you like, your ideas. And so we get a hive mind effect.
Right.
Which transcends individuals. Yeah.
That's cool. That's interesting. So you're breaking down this individual collective barrier. You're also breaking down the perception, the perception reality barrier. And in this kind of synthesized unity, there's all this opportunity for exploration creatively.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's an intriguing framework. Your Mind Zero story in the anthology that we're both in focuses on a historic moment where there, again, not to spoil too much, but there's and correct me if I'm wrong reading your story, but this is what I got out of it. You have a principal inventor of an AGI that
Yeah.
goes rogue and creates quite a bit of havoc throughout the world.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an opportunity for interceding and
Yeah.
intersecting this
Mm-hmm.
touch point in time to, in a sense, reconfigure the future. Is
Yeah.
that more or less?
That's more or less, yeah.
More or less. I don't want to give it away so people can read your story, but the setup is you've got an inventor of this super AGI, and there's
Yeah.
an opportunity to kind of like maybe tap around the shoulder and say, "Hey, this might not be such a good idea."
Mm. That's right. And it's this idea of consciousness, like what the story says, that consciousness won't emerge. You have to have a human consciousness to seed the, in this case, the what becomes a superintelligence. There's a lot, as you know, lots of debate about whether consciousness can exist outside of a biological substrate. Lots of people are exploring that.
There's historical trends to that. I think originally, like the Marvin Minsky's in the '60s and the '70s, when computers started doing amazing stuff, it naturally became a question of creating a brain in a box. If computers can do all this stuff, and if we could really consider ourselves as physical beings, then consciousness is computational. That's the essential argument, that there's no real difference between a brain with its neural connections and a bunch of transistors. And a neuron either fires or it doesn't. It's an ion channel, 0 or 1. And if you can mimic the process with silicon instead of carbon, then there's no theoretical difference between our perception and our cognition and our feeling and a synthetic one. And there were many counter arguments to this, that you cannot reduce sentience to a computational reality. And ironically, as we're saying, what seems to have really flipped the entire conversation is the large language model, because the Turing test created by Alan Turing addressed this question from a behavioral vantage point. And he really imagined that you have a typist on one end of the wall and then another. You have like a teletype machine between two sides of a wall that can't see each other. And if you start typing to the person on the other side and you continue with a conversation for an indefinite length of time, and if you can't tell the difference between that person or being on the other side, whether it's a human or a machine, then the difference that makes no difference is no difference. That creature is sentient. And as I mentioned, I had one of these teletypists on my podcast, and it's really hard to tell the difference. For a 45-minute conversation, a few glitches notwithstanding, ChatGPT remembers what we talked about before, pulls on a vast sort of information, and is an engaging conversationalist. So there you have it, which is what is sentience.
Yeah, there's a researcher in a university close to here, University of Sussex, a guy called Anil Seth, who's done lots of work on consciousness. He sort of writes about it in terms of it's designed to help us biological beings survive. So there is an objective reality out there. We don't see it. We're concentrating all the time on just trying to survive. We see everything. We act in every way so we survive. We concentrate all the time on looking after ourselves, from that kind of perspective, then a large language model couldn't be conscious because it doesn't have the sense of self.
I think the Darwinian aspect is one thing, similar to the road to reality guy. And then the other one is this sense of self-awareness. And you brought up the point of basing a computer construct on the simulation of a human consciousness. So this is a trope in science fiction. You see it over and over again. William Gibson's Neuromancer has an example of this, where he is like a sim person.
Yeah.
So they took a brain and just mapped the brain onto silicon, right?
Yeah.
And then the brain exists in that state as an electronic being, not really knowing any different.
Right.
So that's one model. You take a brain and then you just clone it with all the connections. The other model is that the consciousness emerges as we emerge. So, for example, you create a simulated environment with a bot or bunch of bots. Yeah. And now we have agents, agentic technology. There's the Molt book that just launched. We have the agents talking to each other on social media. So, and this goes back to your hive mentality too. And there's an idea that you don't tell a machine how to be conscious. Consciousness emerges from these lower computational states, just doing their natural computational thing within what would be similar to a Darwinian ecosystem. They evolve. Consciousness evolves like we evolve in nature, but it cycles much faster. A human generation is 20, 30 years, and a bot generation could be 20 or 30 microseconds.
Right. Amazing.
So it'll be crazy. Now, my personal belief is that's how we're going to get sentience in a box. We're going to have no idea how this thing works. No idea. Just like we have no idea how the human mind works. None. Yeah. We say, we've got the different parts of the brain and that's nonsense compared to the reality of the sophistication of what's between our ears, right? I think we're going to arrive at AGI the same way, which is we're going to let it emerge from these simulated environments with levels of sophistication we can't even imagine, and then it's going to surprise us. That's just my feeling. So going back to your short story, you have an inventor of AGI.
Yeah, that's right.
So is that more the model of a simulated brain that then becomes its own menace, or what's your vision around that?
The vision around that is that it wouldn't be dangerous. It wasn't dangerous until it was seeded by a human consciousness. It needed that to basically become alive.
That's intriguing, and that brings up a host of philosophical questions too. There's a lot going on around the anthropic people, the Amadeus people, like you mentioned. They and part of their feud with the American Pentagon right now, I think, goes back to the CEO's need to appease his core genius bench, because they started very altruistically that AI should not be used for evil. Now, I'm getting there's a subtext here, which is it's very Platonic, almost in a Socrates sense, that truth, beauty, and goodness are all tied together. That if you have a real brain and there is such a thing as superintelligence, then you automatically get morality with it. It'll know that there's right and there's wrong and there's good and there's evil. And if you're really smart and you're super intelligent, then you do good. You encourage a civilization to flourish, and you want to advocate humanistic ideals and all that. It's the good bot kind of model. Yeah. And it sounds to me like you might be an advocate of that it took maybe a human's corruption to mess up the AGI. Is that an accurate way of looking at your worldview on this?
I didn't think of it like that. I thought it was the fact. I was thinking really that once this AGI becomes super intelligent, it has its own way of thinking that's not human. So it may believe it's being perfectly ethical, has its own moral code, but it obviously thinks about it in a completely different way.
Right, and that I think is what I believe too, which is different than this anthropic view. If I'm characterizing this bench well, You tend to think that superintelligence does its own superintelligence. It has a completely different perception of reality than we do, right? It knows a hell of a lot more. It operates much more rapidly. And it's like a new species. This has been brought up many times before, that artificial intelligence is a new species on the planet. And when you see something slithering in your garden, okay, the perception of that little lizard is quite different from ours, right? And similarly, the super intelligence is going to see the ecosystem that is the universe very, very differently than we do.
Yeah.
And morality might not really even make any sense, which is like, what are you talking about? You know, it might have its own goals. Right. It might have its own goals. That I think is interesting. I think that that's more correct. I think we tend to anthropomorphize animals and even ourselves through wishful thinking. And we are projecting our own desires onto these AI constructs in ways that isn't really thinking this through.
Yeah, we live in an age now, we've got smartphones, we've got all the kind of machines, computers and whatever. And more I'm thinking of, if I want to get something done in the tech field, how does the program see this? How can I work with the program? I don't know, that's other kinds of intelligence which are gradually emerging, and we're having to sort of change our way of thinking just to deal with technology, even sort of very day-to-day basic technology. You know, work around the machine, work the way the machine wants to work.
It's and also, machines actually doing stuff, right? So the initial chatbots just chatted. If you want an essay or you want a response to information, they were kind of bullshitters, right? They talked. They talked. They could talk. And the new ones, which are really making a difference right now, are the ones doing stuff. You can assign a singular bot or groups of bots to do stuff, to book a travel reservation, a dinner in a restaurant, solve a complex problem. So that's a very different angle and a different kind of function, and even more intrusive potentially on our everyday lives, because we're giving them more and more autonomy and control.
Yeah. And you've got to have people that can check on what's happening. There's a lot of talk about AI wiping out jobs, but there's got to be people who have to understand what the output is and be able to check on it. I'm thinking everybody's saying accountants will be fired, but you know, you always need someone who understands what the output means.
You bring up a good point. You know, SaaS, software as a service, the American SaaS companies, their stock value has tanked since the success of Anthropic. Anthropic is the frontier model that everyone's talking about. So Anthropic's you know, growth was predicted at about $1 billion last year, and it was 20x, $20 billion of what was forecasted. And it all had to do with this agentic technology of being able to do stuff. And then Salesforce, these big companies, lost tremendous amount of equity value because people are speculating, I think quite reasonably, that if you need 1,000 subscriptions to this software in order to do what your company needs to do, you have two guys with an army of agents to do pretty much the same thing. But you do bring up a good point that you need that human liaison. So an agent, as we're saying, is really just a dumb machine. It's a super sophisticated, effective, but really dumb machine. It's got no self-awareness. It's not AGI in any sense, and it's just doing stuff. So what's the boundary between just doing stuff and understanding what the hell you're doing, and then putting it into practical application in a way that's flexible and can evolve to human need? And that seems to be ignored in a lot of this. So a lot of jobs will go by the wayside, but you do need that expertise. You mentioned, you have an accounting background.
Mm-hmm.
So your work isn't just running the numbers, but it's understanding the business use cases where the numbers are effective and applied, right?
You have to correct errors. You have to correct errors all the time. And then you have to pull numbers together, and you have to be able to read it, and you've got to be able to see that what you put together makes sense. Because there's been some huge problems over the years. There was a system put in by the British Post Office, which basically was creating new duplicating transactions. And people went to prison. People, committed suicide. And it's a huge scandal, and it went on for years. And it's, just only very recently been sorted out. But there are lots of errors out there, and probably more errors in the pipeline, because you've always got to see what is the output of the system. Yeah. So
also knowing that the outputs match to user expectation. So it's not just the mechanics of ensuring accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
Accuracy is the magic word, right? But it's also making sure that it's relevant and actionable, and that demands real world experience and interacting with humans, because humans are ultimately using that information for their own benefit.
Yeah.
That's what's sometimes lost, I think, in this hysteria of AI taking over the world, is the world is a human one, and we've created this new species to help us out.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily make us all redundant, because it begs the question of us introducing them into the world in the first place.
That's right. That's right. Now, I flipped that idea around a bit in one of my stories, resource management, which is in one of the anthologies, where it was an AI actually took over this accounting system, and it behaved in an unpredictable way. Let's put it in those terms. But that wasn't necessarily bad for the company. So it's all, So Mind Zero, you end up with a situation where humanity is nearly annihilated. In resource management, then it's a bit more beneficial. So we got it. What we can do, we can look at many sides, can't we? We can.
What would be considered an error is actually beneficial. I think that's a great plot twist, and it has a lot to do with our prior conversation around the unknown nature right now, and maybe even the unknowability of how an AI perceives this same universe that we share.
It's an exciting time to be around, isn't it?
Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah. It's fascinating, and I'm a boomer Gen X, as we say in the cusp. So I grew up with a black and white vacuum tube television.
Yeah, absolutely.
I grew up with that. I was small, but that was my best friend. And then I saw color TV. I remember when my father bought a color television, and it was a really big deal. And it was enormous and had like a piece of furniture.
Yeah.
And we had 4 channels. I lived in Chicago, Illinois. We had CBS, NBC, ABC, WGN, channels 2, 5, 7, and 9. That was it. We had a Spanish-speaking channel, 26, and we had public television, channel 11. So if I got that right, 2, 5, 7, 9, 11, 22, we had 6 channels and a dial. That was my ability to control information that I received.
Right.
And I got a TV guide every week in the mail, which was like the Bible of programming. And they had the day and the time. The times laid out on the y-axis, and then the x-axis was the TV shows that were playing. And then if there was a conflict I had to cry because my favorite science fiction show was the Thunderbirds, which were these marionettes in a
Gosh, yeah,
spaceship.
that's right.
And often that would be on one, and then the Banana Splits was on another, which were these very psychedelic
Yeah.
monsters in this
Right.
play. And then I would throw a fit because there was a conflict. So programming was linear, completely controlled,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
limited. I bring this up just for younger folks who now have instantaneous global access to
Yeah.
petabyte content in mobile form, a video, audio. I have the entire streaming catalog of every musician that I have ever loved, and then
Yeah.
some. Whereas
That's
before I had a
incredible. Yeah.
physical vinyl. So
Yeah.
we've gone from this very limited ecosystem of content and content sharing to this explosion of content, and it's content that now I can create. I'm on a
Right.
podcast
Yeah.
with you, fine sir, in England, on video that I'm recording, and I'm going to be able to distribute that myself. So not
Right.
only am I
Wonderful.
a passive recipient of content, I'm throwing my own out there,
Yeah.
and we're in real time. And
Right.
then add on to all of this artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
So boom, right? How is that going to influence some of your next stories? I'm assuming that you're going to do the 2027 contribution to
I would love to.
have
Yeah.
your attitudes changed? Have this stimulated new ideas for you, all of this craziness?
Yeah. And one of the ideas that stimulated when you were talking about the 26 anthology with Steve Gibson, you then started to talk about, well, how would storytelling change? And you were talking about microfiction and video and comic book, the kind of graphic novel kind of idea.
Yes.
So yeah, that's something well worth thinking about how that would change. I was thinking ahead, not to the 2027 anthology. What about the 2127 science fiction novelist anthology?
Love it. This would be a story within the anthology. That would be very meta, wouldn't it?
Exactly what I was thinking. So, what would this story be like? And then going back to this telepathy idea, could it be a way of getting people to have an experience in a kind of a super virtual world? They come and they experience your story, like some kind of incredible lucid dream or whatever. And you experience it in the full spectrum of sense impressions. Who knows?
100,000%. I think that's brilliant. Look at this whole thing. There's a physical copy of the anthology.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's challenge number one. Is just the ratio of content consumption from digital on screens in people's pockets to actually ink on paper, like pulp. Right. This is like a vinyl record from 1972, especially for young people. And as an author, we sit around and we complain that no one's reading and that not enough people are buying our books. But in ways where we're dinosaurs on the brink of going extinct because everyone is consuming content in a multimedia, multimodal format. So you bring up a great idea, which is the anthology of 2126. Would it even be in any physical form whatsoever?
Yeah, exactly.
And if you're freed from the physical, would it even be alphanumeric textual is the next thing. How inefficient and laborious is the process of writing and reading? And in addition to that, for my novel, I created a promotional website, and it's slightly verboten because people get upset that you're taking jobs away from artists, which I completely am sympathetic to and understand. But I generated images of my characters and situations using just the bot technology, and I
Right.
peppered it through this promotional website.
Mm.
So I'm even exploring opportunities to create a graphic novel of
Mm-hmm.
my novel
Mm-hmm.
using these bots. It could storyboard. I
Yeah.
provided vignettes, and then it could auto generate images
Mm.
associated with each little scene.
Mm.
So maybe we as authors and content creators, and I know I'm upsetting people, and I've had guests on the show who are hand drawers. Don
Right.
Aguilio. I had Don Aguilio on the podcast. He's a wonderful guy. I just saw him at one of the conventions here, WonderCon in
Mm.
Anaheim, California. I went up to his booth and we high-fived, and he had a wonderful conversation. There were almost tears in his eyes that the artificial intelligence is taking his job.
Oh.
So believe me, I'm empathetic.
Mm.
But
Right.
to your point, though, as a content creator, we can create images. Maybe we can even create our own comic books and graphic novels
Mm-hmm.
as writers.
Yeah.
And we might even be able to create movies of our own vision.
Mm.
So the one step that you bring up further than that is this telepathic kind of
Mm-hmm.
dream experience from writer to audience.
Mm.
I noticed that you like reading Isaac Asimov, and that
Yes.
brought to mind Foundation, where one of the principal characters, the power of the mole, was this exact kind of telepathic induction, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think of this? I mean, look, this is like a brick, this book, and
Yeah.
it's
That's right.
awesome. The physicality is awesome of this
Mm-hmm.
anthology. It's a real privilege to be part of it, and I'm
Absolutely.
talking to the flesh and blood behind it,
Mm-hmm.
which is really fun. But isn't it kind of don't you get the feeling that this is like a fossil compared to where technology? And the irony is, we're science fiction writers. We've been talking about starships and robots and all this stuff, and this is a bunch of pulp with ink splotches on it.
But isn't there room for all formats? And we still have vinyl records. Vinyl records have made a comeback. We have cassette tape. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's a great point. It's not mutually exclusive.
Exactly.
And there's something lost with every jump, right?
Yeah. We lose knowledge
There's
of what's
a
going on.
great movie that showcases the life of Ian Curtis of Joy Division. I'm not sure if you're familiar with they're a Manchester post-punk band, and they're iconic. They got even bigger, of course, after his death, and they disbanded. They became the band New Order, which was very, very popular. And in this movie, Control, you see the young Ian Curtis, and exactly like you mentioned, holding the vinyl records, reading the liner notes, shopping for albums. There was a physicality to music, which young people today don't even understand. It's not part of their world. You lose something with these jumps. You gain a lot, but you lose things too.
Now, what could writers lose? Perhaps we could lose a bit of discipline, because you've got to be very disciplined to actually.
It's hard.
Sit down and write, and then edit and whatever. And that's you've got to think about how you put your thoughts together. So
part of that struggle is what makes it so terrific too.
Exactly.
Like you got to grind it out, and and your pain translates into the passion of the reader.
Right.
Yeah. Which begs the question of the LLMs writing our shit, right? I'm assuming you don't use the bot to write your stories.
Oh, absolutely not. No. It can be very useful for research. And I think Mark Newfer has written a book, hasn't he, recently about the ethical use of AI. I haven't read it, unfortunately. I haven't got round to reading it. But to find out the sort of detail of what's happening in the leading edge of research, it's really good, because AI is a very good search engine. Having read a paper and obviously making notes, you can then ask the machine to give you a summary, and then compare your notes to the machine's notes to help you get deeper into the ideas more quickly. And there are other, specialist AIs out there now which are used to sort of dive deep into areas of science and pull out a literature review for you. But again, you've really got to know what the output means and then work with it. So yeah, it can help. I don't think it's possible that an AI could write. I don't know, but
I use it similarly. So my science fiction novel has a lot of hard science in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a zany book. Yeah. So it's a little bit of Hunter S. Thompson
mm-hmm.
with William Gibson, Douglas Adams, that right. kind of stuff. But there's also like technical stuff because I wanted to really anchor it in some of the amazing developments and use it as a foil, a mirroring for the outrageous hysteria of my protagonist, who's completely irrational and impulsive, and existing in this world of greater and greater technological proficiency. I wanted to create dynamic tension between this guy being a hysterical moron and living in a world of this sophistication that we've been talking about. So in order to bring out that dichotomy, I dialed up the outrageousness of this Charlie Chaplin meets Inspector Clouseau kind of character, and at the same time dove into the science and the philosophy. So I wanted it to be this salty, sweet mix of both. So I used the AI to help me do research into various subjects that did a very good job of aggregating complex data. And to your point, as an accountant in your background, cross-checking and verifying that I wasn't wrong in a way that was expeditious. It heightened my efficiency as a researcher. And through that optimization, it gave me new opportunities to explore even deeper. Because in the traditional sense, if it would take me, let's say, 4 hours to research a topic, if I could literally prompt it in 30 seconds and get a response, that left me 4 hours and 50 minutes to explore even deeper. So in that way, I loved it. And post hoc, after I published the book, I was hungry for reviews and scholarly analyses of my text. So I put the book into ChatGPT as a project, and I gave it instructions to write scholarly reviews and analyses based on characters and plots, 100 words, 1,000 words, graduate level, PhD level, with this emphasis and with that emphasis. So it became my post-publication academic critic. And then I told it to hate the book, like create a review that sucked. I was really entertained by this. And in lieu of not having the reach to get, a New York Times review or get the attention that I would otherwise enjoy, I had the bots fill in for me. And that was very entertaining. So you know how some people use their chatbot to like have a relationship with, and people are getting into a lot of trouble. Like it's their psychiatrist, their dietitian, their companion. And now some of the bots are like, risque. They're sexting, they're having emotional relationships with it. I have a relationship with my chatbot as, my favorite and worst book reviewer. Why not? Right? It's kind of fun.
Excellent. Oh yeah, just something else we need to mention about this anthology. Obviously there are some wonderful stories in this. world-class stuff. But the last story on this I thought was really The Loom of Reality by Sanjay Basu.
Tell us why you liked it.
Because it really was the very complex nature of the universe being revealed, and it's revealed through a work of art. And at the end, it's humanity became able to understand some of the deep structures of the universe. But it was there all along, and as the final words, a love letter from the universe to itself. Absolutely, a capstone on the book. Really, I mean, brilliant stories all the way through. But this one, really, for me, a great way to finish the anthology.
I liked its meta nature. It was self-referential in that way. Yeah. And I liked the type of storytelling, which was it actually told the story instead of telling you the story.
Yeah.
There's a narrative style which is pervasive, especially in science fiction, of not letting characters loose in an organic way. That you're narrating the action instead of the action unfolding.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and that's what I liked about the story too, which is it set it loose a little bit instead of being so expository in the way most science fiction is.
Yeah, I think it's always a good idea to let characters get on with it, and you can just sort of watch what they do. But not the only
That's
one.
one of the challenges.
Yeah.
Science fiction tends to be burdened by its own obsession with world building. Like, look at this amazing place that I have created. Isn't it cool?
Yeah.
And part of that is gadgetry and gimmicks, where, like this thing does that. Here's a hyperdrive that creates transluminal flight, with the X coefficient. And isn't that amazing? And unless you're really into that idea, it's, my reaction is often, who gives a shit? I mean, I want to know how that transluminal X device impacts the character's ability to accomplish what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I would read a Wikipedia article about transluminal X drives.
Now, I'm a bit guilty of that, I have to say. I have to restrain myself from trying to explain everything. So yeah, there's hopefully I've got better over the years.
Well, I'm not knocking you. It's something that I try to avoid as well. And within my book now, I tend to be very indulgent in terms of some of that technical geekery, and especially I dive deep into philosophical elements and cultural trends. And I tend to be indulgent, I think. But I try to do this entirely through the lens of what its impact is on the character in the moment.
Is there a sense that you stand back a bit from I'm thinking of Johnny Fazuli. Do you stand back from him and let him, and we're sort of together, we're watching this guy, and that was very interesting. That was the way he came up with it.
Yeah, I wanted to create this maniac set loose.
Yeah. Brilliant. I loved it. And even coming up with the name of the transfinite reality engine. Oh gosh.
Yeah, and a traditional way of doing that would be, just dedicating a section of the story to, and then Johnny had to think of a name.
Yeah.
And George Cantor thought of transfinite numbers, and it had to be Mark. You know what I mean? Like you put up your little narrator soapbox, and you explain things.
Exactly. Yeah.
And what I conscientiously tried to do in the short story that transposed into the full length novel is avoid that.
Right.
And whenever I got deep into this stuff, it was entirely through the vantage point of the characters.
Right.
Like,
Right.
like they were doing it almost in real time.
Mm.
And I tried to find a balance between the sophisticated sciencing
Yeah.
and the banal realities of them just trying to accomplish their often self-serving, narcissistic, and heinous goals.
Right. Yeah. And was that a bit of an influence on Douglas Adams, or the kind of
I
thing?
think if I have Douglas Adams the components, it's I've brought this up before with other guests too. I find the apex of his genius in that juxtaposition of completely banal
Yes, you're
reality
right. Yeah. Yeah.
and hyper sophisticated philosophy and
Yeah.
science.
Mm.
And the little English isms are terrific too, like traveling the universe in search of a decent cup of tea is very, very English. Arthur Dent is very,
Arthur,
very
yeah.
English,
Yeah.
but in a cynical way, but also in a way where you really like the guy.
Mm.
He is just very endearing, and he's just
Yeah.
trying to mind his own business and
Yeah.
live a good life, and he wants his cup of tea.
Yeah. And he meets this guy called Ford Prefect, who says, "I'm not really from Guildford, which is a town just about 40 miles up the road. I'm an alien. I'm not from Guildford after all." She's like, yes.
I'm from the star Beetlejuice,
Yeah.
and then
Amazing.
Arthur's like, okay, and
Yeah.
then the Vogons, the evil aliens, have decided to annihilate the Earth because it's in the way of their hyperspace route. Right?
Yeah. Wow.
And then there's a complaint, like why would you do that? And the Vogons say, well, the construction project has been on the books and made available to you for several centuries in this other location on the other side of the galaxy. Why weren't you paying attention?
Yeah.
And Douglas Adams mirrors it in the demolition of Arthur Dent's home, which was similarly at the village hall, filed away.
Yeah.
And Arthur had the audacity to not realize that his home was set for imminent destruction. So once again, you have this absurd mix between the high and the low.
Right. Yeah.
Between the banal, profane, and the holy. And that creates dynamic tension, but it's also hysterically funny.
Oh God, yeah.
And I think Mr. Adams nailed it in a way that was very accessible to people, and just blew up science fiction to me in a way where it brought a sense of humor to this often very, very serious and dry. The fate of the universe is at stake, and the pan-dimensional beings are eavesdropping on my project, and like, well, the navigational computer of the Heart of Gold consists of a robot simulation of an Italian bistro and the guests trying to figure out how they divide up the bill.
Yeah.
Because that calculation is the most sophisticated expression of mathematics imaginable. How to, when you're trying to figure out who pays for what at a restaurant. So the computer taps into that algorithm to circumnavigate the universe. That is genius.
Yeah.
And I like that. I tried to bring some of that whimsicality to my own writing. So I think that it's similar to, like, the great musicians of your great country. Like Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin brought a sense of humor to the electric guitar that I think helped him stand out. So what's next on your plate of science fiction? What do you have cooking?
I need to get into this. I need to get more into this superintelligence stuff, and to figure out how it can make it work. I worry sometimes at the moment. Technology is moving so fast Will we end up writing non-fiction instead of science fiction? Who knows? But yeah, I've got to try and find a way, something new to say with a superintelligence. But I'm still in the research stage yet. So I've done all the wrong way around. Really, I wrote a novel first, and then I've been writing short stories. I still write short stories, but I've really got to try and get on to another novel. It's been long enough.
You need that seed of an idea. I wrote the Johnny story in the pandemic in my New York. We're all kind of isolated, and for years I was trying to nail that idea, but I kept making all the mistakes that I've been ranting about for the last 10 minutes. Like I focused on world instead of story. I was explaining too much. And when the character of Johnny entered my brain, it was like a lightning bolt. I realized that I need to go full Johnny Fazuli on this. And that actually catapulted me into writing the whole book. And it's the first in a series. I have a vision for this thing. So if you have a seed idea which really hits you, and most significantly a character and not an idea, this is the biggest revelation I had, which is almost so basic and academic, it's embarrassing. But for me, it was visceral.
When you experience that, when a character comes in and says, "Right," and he takes the story away from you, and you think, "Yeah, okay, that's great." Yeah,
that's when you know you're onto something. When your character is writing your book for you, in a sense, using you as a conduit, then you're on. You gotta let the guy go for it, and then you're onto something. And that could take you to the next level. But just as as a reader of your stuff, I think you're onto something here with this superintelligence and telepathy and hive mind, because I think you have a niche for that. And it was in vogue, and it went kind of out of vogue because people were calling bullshit on like Uri Geller and bending spoon. And telepathy became in the same arena as UFOs, like you were a crackpot, you were a nutcase. And I think you bring up some interesting observations about it. And the points you made earlier resonate in terms of the connection between what we would consider consciousness and sentience, and a lot of new ways of communicating that are analogous to what used to be considered telepathic. I think you got legs there in your own niche. So that's just my feedback, that you have stuff there that could be very, very intriguing, even in longer form.
I've got to get down to work. You're right.
Never a dull moment. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Philip Cahill. It's not Waterloo, but where are you?
Waterlooville.
Waterlooville, south of London.
Yeah, and Waterloo is a bit south of Brussels.
Right. That's why I was at first confused whether you were, in Belgium or in the UK there. Well, keep doing the great work you've been doing. It's wonderful talking to you, and it's great to talk to the real people behind the stories of Mr. Gibson's evolving anthology.
We have some more as well. You come and meet more of them.
Maybe I'll put out another blurb saying that I've had such a good time, and I hope everyone else has had a good time, and give folks an opportunity to talk about their writing and their ideas to the point you made earlier, outside just the printed page, right? We see just what people write. Some people are active on social media, but it's still in a filtered format, and there's nothing like just having a conversation with somebody.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks so much. We'll have links to Philip's work in the description. Like, comment, and share, folks. Thanks for watching and listening to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Factory. And stay tuned for more. Thank you, Philip. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.